What took place in the 7th episode of The Chosen Season 5, which was titled The Last Supper, Part 3. A cold opening for the Last Supper. In the beginning of the 7th episode, Jesus is seen arriving to the Last Supper with a young man named Mark following closely behind. After Mark has gone to get a servant to assist in serving the disciples, Jesus begins to wrap a towel over himself and fill a wash basin. John 13 verses 3-5. Meanwhile, Mark has gone to find a servant to help feed the apostles. The disciples immediately raise objections, pointing out that their feet are filthy as a result of wandering around the city. But Jesus encourages everyone to sit down and act in accordance with his request for their final dinner together, in a manner that is both gentle and stern. In accordance with the instructions that Jesus gave, Big James is the first person to have his feet washed. This is followed by Thomas, Little James, and Judas. Jesus reacts by saying, "How beautiful upon the mountain are the feet of him who brings good news." Isaiah 52 verse 7. Despite the fact that the disciples are embarrassed. Despite this, Peter continues to feel uneasy. After getting up, he travels to locate an additional wash basin and claims that it is his responsibility to wash the other people. Peter queries how he can allow his rabbi to wash his feet and says that they should be washing themselves. John 13 verse 6. This is despite the fact that Jesus encourages him to sit down. As a reaction, Jesus rebukes Peter and tells him to believe him and do what he asks, even if he does not yet understand, because Peter cannot have any part in what he accomplishes unless he is washed of his sins. John 13 verses 7-8. Peter, in a state of humility, requests Jesus to wash his hands and head as well. However, Jesus explains that this is unnecessary because Peter has already washed. The requirement for Peter to wash is symbolic rather than literal. John 13 verses 9-10. As he washes Peter, Jesus adds that he is, in fact, setting an example for them, instructing them to put aside their pride and to lead through love and service, both to their friends and to their enemies, one of whom is present with them now at this very moment. This causes the disciples to be perplexed and anxious at the beginning of episode 6, which is a result of this. Mark appears in the 7th episode of the 5th season of The Chosen. In the earlier part of that day, Mark is meticulously arranging the tables for the Passover celebration when his father arrives. We find out that Mark had a vision 3 years ago that prompted them to acquire their current home. Additionally, Mark had another vision the night before that saw the room being prepared for Passover. 2 men warning his father that the time for the teacher is near, and himself carrying a water jar. This last component is especially peculiar, considering that women are typically the ones who are responsible for retrieving water. While Mark and his father are on their way to Solomon's porch to listen to further preaching, they see graffiti on their house that reads, "Jesus is the Messiah." The father is concerned that this will put their family in danger. He informs Mark that he should go get some water and wash it off, and Mark gladly complies with his request, understanding that they are successfully implementing his goal. As Mark is gathering water from the well, Peter, John, and Thaddeus come across him and accompany him back to his house in accordance with the instructions that Jesus gave them. In the beginning, they are encouraged to see the phrase "Jesus is the Messiah" scrawled on his house. However, when he begins to wash it off, they get concerned. In spite of this, they proceed to follow the directions that Jesus gave them and contact Mark's father to let him know that Jesus has a question for him. Mark's father grudgingly complies with their request after Mark recognizes them and their request from his dream. Furthermore, he urges Peter to maintain discretion. Peter and John are taken by Mark and his father into the upper room, where they prepare the Passover. Mark 14 verse 16. Thaddeus is sent back to get the other group of people. Mark is keen to make certain that the bread and everything else is satisfactory, but Peter reassures him that he is satisfactory. This is because the Son of God himself told them to come here and gave him a dream. Mark is anxious to make sure that everything is satisfactory. Season 5, Episode 7 of The Chosen, which focuses on the disciples. The fact that Big James is being followed by a man is brought to his attention in the beginning of the episode, and he quickly realizes that Kaphne is the one responsible for this. James discovers Peter in the plaza, where he is delivering a sermon to the crowd about the parable of the faithful servant. Matthew 24 verses 45 to 51, Luke 12 verses 35 to 40. James then notifies Peter that they are being followed. As they make their way back to Phoebe's residence, they discover that the other disciples are desperately removing any trace of leaven from the house in preparation for the Passover Seder. Taking care not to bring up the incident with Caphne, Peter, James, and John express their concern to Jesus over the question of whether or not Phoebe's home is suitable for the Seder. Following this, Jesus instructs Peter and John to look for a young boy who is carrying a water jug and to accompany him to his house, where they should inquire about using their spacious upper room for the Seder. Mark 14 verses 12 to 15. When Peter is about to depart to pray, he gets the disciples together. Despite the fact that they are glad that they do not have to prepare the house, they're concerned about the fact that Caphne's men are being employed by Rome. Peter and John come to the conclusion that it would be best to bring Thaddeus along with them, so that he may return and let the others know where the house is located. After then, the remaining disciples will depart at times that are staggered and will travel in a convoluted manner to reach their destination. Following the instructions that Jesus gave, Peter, John, and Thad were able to locate the higher room as promised. See the previous section. Peter and John are in the process of preparing the Seder, and John is laughing to himself as he recalls how everything started, with them staying up all night fishing before they met the one who created the universe. After then, John continues to explain to Peter how he has been gaining a deeper understanding of Jesus, despite the fact that there are still some things that he does not know. In addition, the one thing that is crystal obvious to him is that Jesus is saddened by what is going to take place in the future. In the meantime, the remaining disciples embarked on their journey to Mark's home, either by themselves or in pairs. The following are examples of items that each of them sees when they stroll through Jerusalem that bring back memories that are displayed in black and white. When Simon Z sees the blood of a lamb pooling on the ground, he is brought back to a period when he and a few other zealots were hiding out in a cave while Romans attempted to break in. Z orders his other soldiers to flee down the back alley, with the intention of sacrificing themselves in combat with the Romans in order to buy them some time. Instead, the Romans proceed to circle around the back themselves, locate his other soldiers, and then execute them. After that, they depart, supposing that their mission has been accomplished. Z is responsible for mourning the loss of his brothers. During the time that Nathaniel was studying for his architectural exams, he comes across a woman who is selling a Greek lyre with 7 strings. This brings back memories of the time. He hears the melody of a lyre coming from the synagogue that is located next door, just as he is beginning to lose his composure under the weight of the pressure. While he is rising, he finds comfort by listening to a woman sing Psalm 130 with her voice. Following that, he is sent a letter from Philip, who is currently assisting John in preparing for the journey, but is missing him. In the hope that he will one day be able to assist in the construction of a road for the upcoming king, Philip encourages him to continue his studies. Nathaniel discovers the temple and is inspired by it. This brings him back to the present. While Andrew and Philip are strolling around the city, Roman guards instruct them to move and make sure that they are in the right place for the litter of a Roman aristocrat. During this time, they reflect about the first journey that Andrew took with the disciples of John the Baptist. In the event that John discovers several Romans destroying trees in order to construct a road for a significant individual, John condemns them for defacing the hallowed land and for displacing the people who now reside there. Luke 3 verse 16 says that he claims that he is also constructing a straight route for someone whose sandals he is not worthy to untie from their sandals. According to Luke 3 verse 9, he informs the Roman that the axe has been placed at the base of the tree and that everyone who does not bear good fruit will be chopped down. John cautions the soldier that he must quit extorting money and be content with his wages. Luke 3 verse 14. This is despite the fact that the soldier attempts to reject him for speaking in riddles to other people. As the conversation continues, Andrew informs Philip that he must return to fishing in order to pay their taxes. However, Philip dismisses the concept of taxes as a human invention that is meaningless now that the Messiah is close at hand. Philip gives Andrew some honey locusts to eat when Andrew maintains that he is too hungry to worry about such things. Mark 1 verse 6. Andrew is disappointed by Philip's response. Thomas remembers the last time he was with his father as he watches a water jar fall and crack after it has fallen. From what we have learned, Thomas's father and his uncles went to a man who owed them money. Things went out of control, and it appears that Thomas's father was responsible for the death of someone. Roman soldiers come in, knock over a water jar, and drag him away as he reassures Thomas that he loves him and asks him to take care of his mother. When he is sharing, Roman soldiers barge in and disrupt the water jug. As Matthew walked by a large tax booth, he witnessed someone spitting in the face of a tax collector. This prompted him to reflect on the fact that he had experienced the same thing on his very first day of work. The centurion claims that he will only become engaged in the situation when there is a genuine threat, despite the fact that he asks Gaius for assistance. Gaius claims that this is a part of the contract that he has accepted, despite the fact that the spit is obviously a significant issue for the young man who is quite particular about his appearance. On the other hand, when a customer actually does threaten Matthew, Gaius shoos him away and explains to Matthew that in order to avoid being attacked, he will require a driver to transport him back and forth to the tax booth. The date for this event has been set by Gaius. As he expresses his gratitude, Matthew expresses his anguish over the fact that he feels different and misunderstood. This is something that Gaius acknowledges, but he does not promise him any special assistance. Little James remembers his graduation from cantor school as he walks past the temple choir performing and thinks about his own graduation. When his instructor is handing out certificates, he asks each pupil where he plans to travel. He is surprised when James declares that he would go join the 288 in Jerusalem. James's statement causes him to be taken aback. After removing him from the group, the instructor explains that James' dream would not come true since the laws that ban males with a physical deformity or impairment from joining the priesthood, Leviticus 2 verse 18, are now being applied to public temple workers such as choir singers. He strongly recommends that little James find a job in another city, such as Bethany. Nevertheless, James is adamant about not giving up on his goals and instead decides to travel to Jerusalem. Because James is unable to start a fire while he is traveling, he is forced to curl up in his cloak on the ground of the forest. This continues until Thaddeus appears and examines him to determine whether or not he is a dead corpse. Jesus also makes an appearance and, after lighting a fire, asks little James to tell him the narrative of his life for him. Later on, we observe that the upper room is filled with nearly all of the disciples who have gathered there. John watches with apprehension as Roman soldiers approach the house. His family and friends all run away, but the soldiers continue their advance. However, when the disciples become aware that Thaddeus has not been seen, they become concerned about the reason for his prolonged absence. The Chosen, Season 5, Episode 7, Judas in the show. As Judas makes his way back from his meeting with Caiaphas, he comes face to face with his sister, Deborah, who is in Jerusalem for the Passover celebration. The revelation that she was a part of the crowd that greeted Jesus with music and palms is revealed, and she extends her congratulations to her brother for finally being correct about anything. Deborah is able to comprehend the situation and expresses her optimism that the predictions may be realized on that particular evening, despite the fact that Judas is unable to accompany her to the Seder or give the location of where he would be. As she takes note of his concern, she expresses her understanding that there must be a great deal going on and encourages him to carry out the tasks that he is obligated to complete. She also makes the ironic observation that the name of the Iscariots will be remembered forever because of him. A review of the 7th episode of Season 5 of The Chosen. To tell you the truth, I did not find Episode 7 to be the most compelling episode of The Chosen Season 5, and the primary reason for this is as follows. In the flashbacks of the disciple, I am aware that I have been moaning that we have not received enough from the point of view of the disciples during this season. Nonetheless, the flashbacks that were provided by the disciples were not the appropriate remedy. I have a proper understanding of the reasoning behind what The Chosen is doing. Every once in a while, in the moments leading up to the show's climactic conclusion, the characters will be given a little pause in which they're able to contemplate their history, acquire new perspectives or words of encouragement, and get themselves ready to confront the ultimate struggle. However, in order for this kind of thing to be done successfully, the memory needs to be pertinent to what the character has been going through and the difficulty that is still to come. It is unfortunate that the majority of the flashbacks in Episode 7 appeared to be utterly unrelated to the events that have transpired up to this point in Season 5 and to the events that are still to come. To put it another way, they arrived at the impression of being superfluous biographical digressions that will not really matter in the long run. A significant error was made when, during the last episode of the season, the team decided to slow down in order to spend time on a number of drawn-out and needless sequences. The fact that this occurred 2/3 of the way through a theatrical performance that lasted for 3 hours only made the situation more challenging. One of the issues was that there were a significant amount of flashbacks that were all crammed into a single episode, along with the introduction of Episode 8. There would have been no harm in including a couple of flashbacks, and it would have been far simpler to incorporate them into the narrative of the 5th season also. On the other hand, if it had been of utmost significance to incorporate flashbacks from all of the lesser followers, the show might have distributed them throughout the entirety of the season rather than focusing them in a single episode. Even though some of the flashbacks, such as those involving little James, Andrew and Philip, and Simon Z, were naturally engaging, the length of time that they lasted was excessive. Some of them might have been eliminated totally. The flashback by Nathaniel was uninteresting. As much as I enjoy seeing Kirkwaller in the role of Gaius, the flashback that Matthew had seemed to be a complete repetition of information that we were already familiar with. These are the kinds of moments that I know will be cherished by certain readers who are fans of particular minor characters. But the time that was spent on these sequences might have been put to far better use by building actual tales for the characters who are the primary focus of the show. To give one example, the program should have done a little bit more to set up Peter's objection to letting Jesus wash his feet. Additional information: I have gained a better appreciation for the thematic role of the flashback scenes as a result of conducting a more in-depth research of the episode. See below. However, this does not erase any of the faults that were brought up earlier, which are primarily about the storytelling and the pace. On other matters, the concern regarding Thaddeus' tardy arrival felt like yet another fabricated cliffhanger, and it was not the kind of moment that the penultimate episode ought to have hung on to. On the other hand, I kind of wish that the program had provided Mark with a little bit more to do other just being eager and genuine. Caffney's men function in a somewhat limited capacity in the organization. If it is such a significant problem that they are following the disciples, then it would have been reasonable for us to have produced a sequence in which the disciples had to exert a great deal of effort in order to avoid them. As a result of the disciples' casual wandering throughout the city, the danger was significantly reduced. It's not just that I want to be critical of Episode 7. Only a few things stood out to me as really appealing. The foot washing. The actors did an excellent job of expressing the sense of uneasiness and shame that the disciples would have felt during this particular scene. The struggle that Judas is going through is intense. The conversation that takes place between Jesus and Peter is also very accurate, and I personally enjoy the fact that Peter is given the opportunity to take charge after he eventually allows Jesus to wash his feet. Without getting bogged down in the process of drawing out the analogy, the show also makes a passing reference to the theological and spiritual ramifications of the current situation. For the most part, this is one of the cold openings that has been the most successful this season, second only to the Dainu. At first, I was unsure of how I felt about the decision to have Mark be motivated by a vision. I was also unsure of what I thought about the decision. Not only does the biblical story fail to provide a reason for why the owner of the house welcomes Jesus, but one may also consider other possible interpretations, such as the fact that Jesus had previously healed him. However, Mark's enthusiasm to meet the details of the vision that he got appears to be invoking the way in which God commanded Moses to be careful when constructing the tabernacle in accordance with the vision of its design that he received, Exodus 25 verses 9 and 40. This relationship seems to be rather appropriate, given that the Last Supper is the event that marks the beginning of the new covenant in the new temple, which is the church. Judas and Devorah. The last time Judas saw his sister, Devorah, was a painfully ironic experience that really bolstered his desire to carry on. The 7th episode, titled John versus Peter, did an excellent job of juxtaposing the two most influential leaders among the disciples. For the purpose of gaining a better grasp of the distinction between John's Gospel and Peter's Gospel, also known as the Gospel of Mark, their contrasting personalities provide a helpful framework. The flashbacks about the disciple. As I mentioned before, I did find some of the flashbacks to be enjoyable. I found the irony of Simon Z's to be excruciating. I had a wonderful time seeing David Amito perform the role of John the Baptist once more. As well as that, the narrative of little James was moving. Despite the fact that episode 7 was a squandered opportunity, it was hardly a disastrous episode. In point of fact, I believe that a great number of devoted viewers of the show will not have any issues with the episode, particularly if they are able to watch it on their own and in the middle of a 3-hour session. Nevertheless, I do not anticipate it being one of my favorite episodes of The Chosen. The 7th episode of Season 5 of The Chosen. Key themes. The vulnerability of humans. Every single one of us, as human beings, has certain areas of vulnerability, aspects of who we are, or of our history that we conceal in order to avoid being judged, feeling ashamed, or appearing weak. We cover up because we are afraid of how other people may assess the appearance or sin of our body parts. And because of this, we cover up in order to shield ourselves from feeling ashamed. The body is a primary location of vulnerability. The feet, which are a portion of the body that is especially prone to unpleasant odors and ugly deformities, are a prime example of this phenomenon. As Jesus approaches his followers during the frigid open and asks them to wash their feet, he is extending an invitation to them to put their faith in him with regard to a very vulnerable part of their lives. The interaction that he has with little James is where this is most readily seen. Little James is accustomed to dealing with the humiliation that comes with his feet because he has a significant physical abnormality. As you listen to him, you can feel how challenging it is for him to reveal this aspect of himself. The fact that he is prepared to do so is evidence of the fact that Jesus has earned his trust via the gentle love and care that he displayed. And Jesus does not merely tolerate little James' weakness. Rather, he takes something that the world would scorn or humiliate and declares it to be something of beauty and dignity. Isaiah 52 verse 7. This indicates that Peter is unwilling to display his vulnerability and weakness, as evidenced by the fact that he refuses to get his feet washed. It is because of this that he runs the risk of having no one to share with Jesus. The grace of Jesus is not something that can be experienced by us unless we are willing to entrust him with the parts of our lives in which we're the most vulnerable, the most ugly aspects of who we are and what we have done. It is excruciating to do so, since we are well aware of the manner in which other people would treat us if they were to see the ugly things that are contained within us. However, we must have faith that Jesus would not humiliate us, but rather purify what is filthy and restore the beauty and dignity that we were intended to possess. There are other instances throughout the remainder of the show in which the necessity to either conceal or eliminate potential vulnerabilities is brought up. In the event that Mark's house is covered in graffiti, his father experiences feelings of vulnerability. The blemish has the potential to bring shame and criticism onto his household. Therefore, he instructs his son to immediately wash it off. When Jesus announces that they will be eating somewhere else, the disciples are in a state of embarrassment because of the pagan nature of Phoebe's home. They are working very hard to clean things up in preparation for Passover. It is obvious that Judas is feeling vulnerable over the fact that he has betrayed Jesus, and as a result, he conceals this information during his conversation with Devorah. The lengthy flashback sequence has a number of purposes, one of which is to reveal to us some of the weaknesses that the disciples have. Simon Z is embarrassed by the fact that he was responsible for the deaths of his fellow soldiers. During the course of his studies, Nathanael experienced a moment of weakness which he describes as being very close to breaking down. The account of Andrew emphasizes his hunger, in addition to the humiliating enslavement of the land and the people under the rule of Rome. The account of Thomas brings to light the traumatic experience of his father's detention. The account of Matthew serves to bring to our attention how alone and despised he was. Furthermore, the narrative of little James demonstrates how his condition led to feelings of humiliation and rejection. There is a significant significance to the decision to conclude the program with little James' story. In the same way that little James entrusts Jesus with his feet at the beginning of the episode, we see him beginning to entrust Jesus with his story when he is in his flashback. As Jesus listens to little James' account of being rejected and failing, rather than shaming him, he instills in him a sense of respect and dignity. The fact that we can trust Jesus with every aspect of our identities, regardless of how embarrassing they may be, is one of the things that makes him such a unique and remarkable figure. Episode 7 of the 5th season of The Chosen features additional themes. I invite you to visit my supporters-only blog on Buy Me a Coffee for further research on 2 additional critical issues, namely trust/obedience and servant leadership. What were your thoughts on the 5th episode of the 7th season of The Chosen? Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts, questions, and hypotheses in the comment section below. A brief clip depicting Jesus as a little child interacting with another infant, John the Baptist or Lazarus, is shown at the beginning of the 3rd episode. On the evening before Rosh Hashanah, we see Jesus making his way to Mary's house in Nazareth. This occurs after the titles have cleared. The lunch is served to him by his mother, and while they are eating, they engage in some idle chatter about the lives of his disciples. We find out that James and Jude, 2 of Jesus' brothers, have made the decision to not celebrate the holiday at home in order to prevent trouble. It is hinted that they are jealous of all the attention that Jesus is receiving. At some point, Jesus approaches his mother and requests a box. In the beginning, she makes an effort to avoid the request because she is aware that this is a sign that his time is drawing near. Jesus responds, "If not now, when?" A call back to something Mary says to Jesus in the 5th episode of the 1st season. Jesus locates the box right next to his bed and removes a bridle from it. The following day, the people of Nazareth will celebrate Rosh Hashanah with horns, dancing, and music throughout the festivities. In the 5th episode of the 1st season, Jesus comes face to face with a couple whose wedding he blessed with wine. His teachings and other miracles, as well as the account of that particular miracle, have spread throughout the world. After making the journey from Bethany with his sisters Mary and Martha, Lazarus, a boyhood acquaintance of Jesus, arrives at the scene. Mary wants to know if the reports that Jesus is claiming to be the Messiah are really true, but Lazarus tries to keep her from asking her question. It is obvious that everyone is curious, but they are also reluctant to bring up the sensitive topic. Lazarus encourages Rabbi Benjamin, the local teacher, to allow Jesus to deliver the message for Rosh Hashanah. In spite of the fact that Jesus did not complete Bet Midrash, which is the traditional rabbinical education, the rabbi accepts, and Jesus agrees to find something significant to contribute to the conversation. Second act of episode 3. The beginning of the synagogue service constitutes the beginning of the following scenario. In the course of Rabbi Benjamin's opening blessing, a particular emphasis is placed on the fact that God has chosen us, the Jews, from all the peoples, and that the people are anticipating the promised arrival of Mashiach, your anointed one, the son of David. Jesus is invited to stand up and kindly praises the rabbi. He also humbly invites the audience to assist him in the event that he misses a word while he is reading. Jesus reads from Isaiah 61 and proclaims that the Jubilee, which is the year of God's favor, has arrived and that salvation is being offered to those who have broken hearts. Everyone observes with great attention as Jesus makes this announcement. Rabbi Benjamin is perplexed as to why Jesus chose to stop the reading in the middle of the chapter and disregard the portion of the passage that refers to the day of the vengeance of our God, Isaiah 61 verse 2, particularly in light of the fact that Romans were oppressing the people. According to Jesus, He has not come to bring retribution, but rather to provide salvation to those who know him. Inquiring about the manner in which Jesus can assert that he is the one who brings salvation and redemption, the rabbi raises inquiries. Jesus changes the subject of the conversation and explains that he has come to bring about a relief from spiritual debt, not physical debt. The rabbi takes offense at this notion, pointing out that the descendants of Abraham do not have any spiritual debt. See to John 8 verses 31 to 33 for further understanding. They persist in pushing Jesus to provide an explanation as to whether he is only a rabbi or whether he is anything more. Jesus continues to be evasive, but he does recognize that it is logical that they would have a difficult time embracing him because a prophet is not without honor, with the exception of his hometown, John 4 verse 44, where everyone has seen him grow up. He is aware that they would be looking for signs and miracles, but he draws their attention to the stories of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, 1 Kings 17 verses 8 to 16, and Elisha and Naaman, 2 Kings 5, to show the kind of people who are able to receive signs and wonders. These individuals are those who are spiritually desperate and have a broken heart. The people are given a warning by Jesus that he will not be able to save them unless they acknowledge their own spiritual destitution. At this, the rabbi questions whether Jesus is claiming to speak for the Lord or if he is claiming to be the Messiah, to which Jesus simply says yes. The rabbi warns that if he doesn't recant, they will be forced to execute him, according to the law of Moses, to which Jesus responds, I am the law of Moses. When the people attempt to seize Jesus, Lazarus tries to intervene and smooth things over, but Jesus tells his friend not to worry and allows himself to be taken away. Fourth act of episode 3. Due to the fact that Jesus is accused of making a false prophecy, he is carried to the edge of a precipice in order to be executed. The compassion that Rabbi Benjamin has for Mary and Joseph, who has passed away, is evident in his expression of sorrow. Jesus is adamant that he will not change his mind, but he informs the rabbi and the audience that the timing is not yet right for him to die. After saying so, he passes past the throng, who does not appear to be able to answer because they are either too stunned or supernaturally enthralled. During the time that Jesus is visiting the tomb of his father, Joseph, we are taken back to a recollection from his infancy. One of the things that we see is Joseph teaching Jesus to read by referring to Isaiah 61 and talking about what it means to have a shattered heart. Joseph performs a joke on Jesus when he is helping him hammer together two pieces of wood that are coincidentally shaped like a cross. This provides them with an opportunity to bond with one another. In the first act, Joseph is the one who brings out the box that Jesus was looking for and removes the bridle from it. He says that it was formerly owned by their ancestor who escaped from Egypt during the Exodus. It has been passed down through their family for many years as a reminder of God's deliverance in the past and the hope that God will deliver them in the future. Joseph gives it to Jesus, despite the fact that he is aware that Jesus will most likely not have a son after which he can pass it on to himself. He acknowledges to Jesus that the privilege of being a steward of his life on earth has been the highest honor he could ever hope to receive, and he prays that he has been a good steward. At the time that Mary and Lazarus come, Jesus is still standing at the tomb, lost in thought by himself. Finding out that he is fine is a source of relief for them. The bridle and the goods that Jesus carried in his bag are in Lazarus' possession. Jesus explains to his mother that he had no choice but to say what he did, but he is aware that those words must have been terrifying for her. In light of the fact that this will be his final trip to Nazareth, he takes notice that there is no going back now. For the time being, he requests that Mary also depart and go to Bethany to stay with Lazarus rather than staying with him. Lazarus invites him to pay them a visit in the near future, possibly for the Rosh Hashanah that will follow. Episode 3 of the third season of The Chosen, a review. As I mentioned before, I believe that episode 3 of The Chosen Season 3 is my favorite episode of the season so far. The sequences ran pretty nicely and produced an experience that was emotionally engaging, while also delving into a number of topics that were really profound and intricate. There are a few things of the episode that I preferred the most. The little scene depicting Jesus when he was a toddler struck a chord with me on a personal level because I am currently caring for a child who is 2 years old. The portrayal of the bond that Jesus had with Mary, who was his mother, was cute and heartwarming. The fact that Jesus was hanging out with Lazarus, a friend from his youth, was an absolutely fascinating sight. Although it is not stated in the Bible that Jesus and Lazarus were childhood friends, I believe that depicting them as such was a wise adaptation choice. This is because it gives their connection a distinctive dimension and makes sense of the great regard that Jesus plainly does have for Lazarus in the Bible. Several ingenious methods were utilized by the performance in order to convey the conflict that existed between the limits that Jesus possessed as a human being, his humility, and his role as the Messiah. In the past, I have asked my friends to speculate on what it might be like to participate in sports with Jesus in a new heavens and new earth. In spite of the fact that the majority of people are of the opinion that Jesus would triumph in any competition he participated in, I have always been of the opinion that his physical physique and skills are limited and that he could end up losing. It was for this reason that I found it enjoyable to see Jesus lose the game that he was playing with his pals. During the Rosh Hashanah discussion, the play does an excellent job of generating suspense, despite the fact that a religious disagreement does not appear to be a particularly dramatic subject. Although I was taken aback by the manner in which the musical portrayed Jesus' escape from the execution, it was effective. That it is not fully clear whether the folks are merely shocked or frozen in a supernatural way is something that I find appealing. I thought it was great that the performance continued to focus on the moment of Jesus standing at Joseph's tomb, as well as the scene of him living with Joseph when he was a toddler. Our ability to emotionally enter those situations and relate with what Jesus was experiencing was greatly enhanced as a result of this. Instead of doing another episode in the classic Christmas tale, the show developed a situational parallel between what Jesus was doing, coming home for the holidays, and what many viewers were doing. This parallel was constructed by the show. It also highlighted important Christmas themes, which will be discussed further later. This was a very ingenious method to have a Christmas show without having to repeat the same narrative material on many occasions. The Chosen Season 3 Episode 3 covers the following key themes. Aside from being a very emotional installment, the third episode of the third season tackled some rather significant subjects, including the following: Christ's incarnation and the limitations of the human condition. In spite of the fact that Episode 3 did not represent the events that took place over Christmas, it did feature a number of Christmas-related motifs, as I mentioned before. In particular, the episode was interested in investigating the constraints that Jesus is subject to as an incarnate human being. In the course of the episode, we are reminded of the vulnerability and dependence of Jesus in the following ways. We have a mental image of Jesus as a weeping infant who is unable to even communicate verbally. When Jesus finally arrives at his home, he is famished and in need of rest. We see the limitations of Jesus' omniscience when we consider the fact that he had to inquire with his mother about the fate of a locally owned dog. Additionally, we see how the dog was able to provide him with some level of comfort. The desire that Jesus had to be with his friends Lazarus, Mary, and Martha is something that we see. It is said that Jesus was not the best student and that he was unable to pay to attend school in order to become a rabbi. The lack of hand-eye coordination that Jesus possesses causes him to lose a game that he is playing. The emotional urge that Jesus had to visit the tomb of his adoptive father for the very last time is revealed to us. During his childhood, Jesus had to be instructed in a variety of skills, including how to read, how to hammer, and how to think, for example, about what it is to have a broken heart. We see that Jesus, as a youngster, is concerned about using a hammer, and we see that he is afraid when Joseph acts as if he is harmed. The emotional solace that Jesus has as a result of the heirloom that Joseph has given to him is demonstrated here. The purpose of these events is to portray a picture of Jesus that is relatable to us as human beings. While it is true that Jesus is completely without sin in his character, it is also true that during his time on earth, he had emotional, bodily, and developmental needs just like we have. through the assistance of his parents and the community, he was able to mature into a mature person. He did not arrive from heaven in his final form. Despite the fact that he had reached adulthood, he still possessed limitations and shortcomings, and he was not necessarily successful in everything. Taking on a human nature in its entirety and becoming incarnate was what it meant for the Son of God to become a human being. The humbling nature of Jesus. The third episode of the third season not only shows us how Jesus lowered himself ontologically and took on human limits, but it also shows us how Jesus lowered himself socially and took on a humble status while he was on earth. It is not just that Jesus is portrayed as humble by other people on several occasions, for example, by the rabbi's wife, but we also witness that humility in the manner that he conducts himself. It would not be difficult for a person who works miracles to develop a bloated ego. The fact that Jesus does not reject the acts that he has done does not change the fact that he appears almost embarrassed when discussing those achievements and his role as the Messiah. Despite the fact that the teachings of Jesus have gained a lot of popularity, Lazarus is the one who needs to convince Jesus to speak at the synagogue. Jesus himself shows reverence to Rabbi Benjamin and does not make a demand to be given the pulpit. However, when he is given the opportunity to speak, he does not shy away from the opportunity. Compare this with Moses when he was approached by the burning bush. Jesus makes an effort to leave the game so that he won't be responsible for the defeat of his team. Nevertheless, when he is forced to participate, he is eager to do so, and he doesn't appear to mind the fact that he is losing. Jesus is able to laugh at Lazarus' joke, during which he refers to Jesus' backpack as his home. Jesus also compliments Lazarus on his great career. Rabbi Benjamin is praised by Jesus in front of the synagogue, and he is invited to be called out by the congregation if he fails to read a word. In spite of the fact that he had descended from the highest reaches of heaven, these moments serve to remind us that Jesus had a rather humble demeanor. In contrast to the majority of preachers who proclaim him, he was able to laugh at himself and was not preoccupied with his own fame and ambition during his lifetime. Exhausted from ministry, and your family members will be burdened with new responsibilities, which will create the ideal conditions for confrontation. The presence of this dynamic, which I'm assuming will continue for the next few episodes, elucidates for me the reason why Dallas has stated that the theme of the season is the well-known invitation to rest that Jesus extended to his followers. I will give you rest if you come to me, all of you who are working hard and carrying a lot of weight. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls if you take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Therefore, my weight is light, and my yoke is easy. Matthew 11 verses 28 to 30, English Standard Version. How much does it cost to seek the truth? The Jairus and Yusuf plot emphasizes the cost of seeking the truth, in contrast to the storylines that involve the disciples, which center on the sacrifices that were made in order to serve Jesus. The conversation that takes place between Jairus and Yusuf provides us with a glimpse into the anxieties and dangers that these two individuals who are seeking to learn more about Jesus are required to face in order to evaluate their beliefs about him. The contrast between Jairus' brazen commitment and Yusuf's scared wavering that emerges from their chats is something that I find particularly interesting. However, I'm still uncertain as to whether or not Yusuf will have the capacity to maintain his dedication to the truth in the event that he is put to the test. The proclamation that was made in the Sanhedrin drives home the sense of impending danger and makes it abundantly evident that they are not merely being cautious. There may be serious consequences for them if they chose to continue looking for the truth. The fact that Jairus is worried that God might punish him for following Jesus is another aspect that I find appealing. I can't help but think that this dread would strike a chord with viewers who, while having been brought up in a different faith similar to Islam, are looking for the truth about Jesus. Are you clean or unclean? Although it was evident that the idea of ceremonial purity and impurity, being clean or unclean, would be discussed in an episode titled Clean, I was curious to see how it was presented in all of the different ways that it was presented. The sick and demonized individuals that the apostles come across are not only suffering physically, They're also suffering from a state of uncleanness that is unending. In addition, once they have been recovered, they will regain the ability to perform ritual washings. In the first scene that takes place in the synagogue, the reading is taken from Leviticus, which contains the regulations that govern how bodily discharges render a person unclean. Because of the sewage, the cistern of the synagogue is not only dirty and unpleasant, but it is also ritually unclean. Jairus' daughter becomes ill as a result of the contaminated water in the cistern. Because of her bleeding condition, Veronica is in a state of uncleanness that will last for an unknown amount of time. There's a brief discussion on how some of the apostles walked through Gentile cities, which would have been deemed filthy during the debriefing that takes place with the apostles. In the event that Tamar's necklace is of a pagan origin, it may be seen as impure. Due to the fact that drinking from Gaius' flask would render him filthy, Simon does not sip from it. Following Gaius' assertion that Jews make life more difficult for themselves as a result of their quest of ceremonial purity, Simon expresses his belief that Jesus will bring about a shift in this regard. With relation to the storyline, the majority of what happens in Episode 4 is the establishment of problems that will be remedied in Episode 5 and the remaining episodes of Season 3. With regard to the topic of uncleanness, the same holds true. The events that occurred in Episode 4 that were discussed before brought up a range of thematic issues about what ritual purity and impurity are, but we will have to wait until Episode 5 to find out the solutions to these questions. Enlightenment and spiritual enablement. There were several powerful pictures of spiritual empowerment and spiritual gifts that were presented to us in the opening montage. The apostles' obvious amazement, which they expressed when exercising spiritual authority, made it abundantly plain that the power they were exercising did not belong to them personally. Later on, when Big James is complaining about how Jesus gave them power and not understanding, Judas explains that Jesus did not actually give them power in the first place. Rather, he was working with them in some way during the times when they performed miracles, even though he was not physically present. Although The Chosen has not provided a great deal of information regarding the Holy Spirit up until this point, I believe that conversations such as this are intended to lay the groundwork for a discussion on what it means to have the Spirit of Jesus dwell within us. In addition, the investigation of spiritual gifts and empowerment touches on the subject of motivations and personalities. Big James is concerned by the sensation of spiritual empowerment for a number of reasons, one of which is that he feels like a hypocrite when he preaches ideas and exhortations that are beyond his own grasp and maturity. With regard to John, on the other hand, he explains how much he cherished the sensation of power, and Philip cautions him that this could lead to temptation. Comparison of pride and humility. In spite of the fact that Philip's caution to John is the most direct warning against pride, we observe the contrast between humility and pride throughout the tale. The haughty entitlement that Simon demonstrates upon his return from his travels is the root cause of a significant portion of the problems that he has with Eden. On the other hand, the advice that Gaius gives at the end of the episode for resolving a quarrel between the spouses, "You are right, I'm sorry," is all about having humility. Mary Magdalene and Tamar Magdalene both cope with pride in various ways. Tamar displays pride in the way that she looks down on Matthew's style, and in the way that she speaks to Mary and Zebedee. On the other hand, Mary Magdalene displays pride in the way that she criticizes Tamar's necklace without understanding it and in her irritation. Meanwhile, Zebedee is a model of humility in every sense of the word. In addition, I believe that Veronica is supposed to be a model of humility because of the submissive manner in which she communicates with Eden and the fact that she is willing to cling to hope. In the meantime, it is very evident that Shmuel and the Sanhedrin are intended to be the pinnacle of pride. To reiterate, we will have to wait until the following episode to find out more about what The Chosen has to say about the tension that exists between pride and humility.